Welcome to the One Take, Conversations with Global Mobility Industry Leaders. I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Hughes, Vice President of Global Business Development at Arpin International Group. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Lynn. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak on the household goods side of the business.
We're delighted to have you. So let's start with the big picture. We all know that people move to where business is happening. And as a moving company, you are at the front lines of seeing where they're going and who's moving. So, what can you tell us about who's moving today and where they're going?
Absolutely. Trends play a very large part in understanding what's happening with expat migrations, and it really has implications on staffing, it has implications on investments, preparation, etc. So, one of the things that we've been looking at is a time period of about 4 to 5 years in understanding from that block of time what's actually happening. And interesting enough, around the 2019 period, we saw a lot of movement if we're looking at it from an outbound versus inbound perspective. Outbound out of the United States, a lot of coastal cities. So we had New York on the East Coast, we had California on the West with San Francisco, including Washington as well. And there's a lot of movement internationally out of those locations. Fast forward to the present, we've seen a little bit of a change in that. And those locations are still hot in terms of people moving in and out, but they're not quite at the top of the list. At the top of the list, some countries may surprise you and others you may be more expecting. For example, China is on the top of the list, and specifically Shanghai, China. And that's because obviously the lockdowns and things that have happened in the news recently. But also on that list is Singapore, including Toronto as well. And those locations have a lot of people moving from them to other areas. If we look at it from an inbound perspective, some of the countries that have the most amount of moves coming in, some countries are the same, which is quite interesting, and some may not be. So, for example, Singapore still remains at the top of that list. So there's a lot of people going out, but there's still a lot of people coming in. In the U.S. Perspective, we actually have a lot more people coming into the West Coast, not so much on the East Coast in terms of volume, but it's just a matter of who's at the top of the list. So we're seeing, from an inbound perspective, Singapore. We're seeing the West Coast of the United States. London as well, interesting enough, is up there. And that really helps to paint a picture of where people are moving, where they're going to be moving in the future. And from a moving company, and especially an international moving company, how do we prepare for that in terms of staffing, investments, etc.?
I think that's really interesting. And I think it does reflect kind of where operations and business is moving at the same time. Toronto surprised me. So let's talk a little bit more because you not only have insights into who's moving and where they're going, but you know what they're taking. And we know that studies have shown that millennials and Gen Zs are value sustainability, not that older people don't, but that they really value sustainability and perhaps have less attachment to some of their things. Have you seen this reflected in what you're moving?
Interesting, yes. So from taking that same block of time, about a 4 to 5 year period, we have seen a change in the actual volume of goods that people are shipping. And that's quite significant because that will indicate not only future trends in terms of style of moves and type of the demographic of the mover themselves, but also what we can expect in terms of preparing for preparing for them in terms of a service scope. So from a C perspective, and again going internationally, we've seen actually a decrease of about 1,000 pounds. So overall, on an average, most people are taking less than they would have about 4 years ago. At the same time, if we start splicing the data by type or mode of shipment, so we have the air, we have the sea, we also have domestic, we have containerized, truck, etc., we start to see trends in that as well. But one of the things that's been very interesting is at the top of that list in terms of preferred mode of transport is actually air. And next to that is sea, and that's kind of traditional, but sea has actually been contested largely through domestic moves. So we had, especially in the last several years due to global issues, we've had a shift in terms of movement domestically versus internationally. International was more on pause, so a lot of people started moving internally in the United States, and that really upticked the volume, and that kind of contended when you had domestic shipments as placeholder number two. But interesting enough, coming into 2022, the C mode of shipments has actually replaced that as number two in the most popular shipping type or shipping mode for expatriates.
So, as you look at the type of mode, the mode of transportation, as well as what you're moving. Is it fair to say you're probably moving more wine collections and pieces of art and fewer old couches?
That's hard to say, of course, because you're talking about highly personal items for individuals. So everybody's different. Every family setup is different. But what we are seeing is that though the amount of goods is decreasing, the value of those goods, either sentimental or even financial, is actually increasing. So when you mention high value items like artwork or those type of things, you may think that a smaller shipment would indicate that there's not many of those items that could be high value, but it's actually could be the exact opposite. So there may be people that instead of moving an entire container are only moving, two lift vans or half a container or something like that, but those items are high value. And a case in point, we had an assignee that was in Beijing. He was there for about a decade, and he loved artwork. He didn't have many items, but years ago he bought a piece of work by a street artist, and by the time he was moving, that street artist became infamous in the art world. And the painting that he bought for a little over $3,000 was valued at 50,000 euros by the time he was leaving. He didn't have a huge shipment, but the things that he did have were much more valuable. And that goes to say across the entire demographic, for even for the quote unquote millennials and the tech generation that don't hold on to a lot of items in terms of couches and sofas and these kind of things. They may have one or two pieces, but you can be sure that a lot of those pieces are either very high in value or very high in sentimental value, and therefore they have an increased amount of importance associated to them.
So that is a great segue to my next question, which is that, we know moving is one of the most stressful life events. It's tough on the employee, the family, and the corporate relocation professionals and service providers who support them. So at Arpin, how are you using technology to make this a better experience for everyone?
I love technology. Given myself being a millennial, I absolutely feel that it is the future in terms of integration to how we can better integrate services. But one of the things that we use as a kind of bedrock to the philosophy of technology, especially with our company, is it's a tool to help assist in better doing or providing the service that we're providing. And I'll give you an example in terms of the kind of guiding philosophy that we use. There's a famous Olympian called Ben Harris who's written a book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster?" And basically, it's a story, not the goat, sorry. Essentially, it's a story about the rowing team and identifying aspects in their daily lives, in their training, eliminating all the waste and focusing only on the things that will make the boat go faster. And from an assignment perspective, we say the same thing. We look at it and say, will it make the assignment transfer easier? And whatever we can do to do that, stimulate that, support that through technology, that's the lens that we're taking. So we're always looking at technology to be a complement to the service that we're providing, not a replacement. And the idea is that if you have the technology behind you, you are freeing up the consultant or whoever's in contact directly with the shipper to use their time effectively and to provide empathetic solutions. So instead of having to spend an hour or 45 minutes updating the system and inputting dates and numbers and all those kind of things, they can now spend 20 minutes on a phone call to that expatriate talking about their transition, understanding what their key core concerns are, what their worries are, whatever the issues are. And it just allows you to be more human in your approach, where you can rely on the technology to take care of the kind of menial tasks.
Yeah. Yeah. Technology is certainly a great enabler and I think can make everything go more smoothly. But we all know that sometimes things just go wrong despite the best laid plans. And my husband's worked in freight forwarding, and I've heard many stories of containers falling into the ocean or goods seized because a client wasn't truthful about everything that was in the container. What are the greatest risks you see when moving household goods, and how can these risks be mitigated?
That's a fantastic question. It's a difficult one, and it's certainly not easy, and it doesn't have one answer to solve it. But to begin with, I think that understanding the problems or the potential risks that could come in shipping goods, either air or sea, internationally, domestic as well, but internationally you have a few more variables going on. that exposes you to more issues of damage and loss and all those kind of things. It really gives us an opportunity to shine and to put our best foot forward. And I think that's really important because you shouldn't, as a company, we don't shy away from issues because we know that this is the areas where we prove ourselves. So, in terms of a shipment going wrong, it does happen. A lot of reasons. For example, a few years ago in Hong Kong, an entire vessel burned down. It was docked in Guangzhou, and it was loaded with e-bike batteries, and it burned down. And this is one of the most popular items most expats coming out of Asia want to bring back, whether it's to Germany or to the US or to wherever. They want to bring back an e-bike because it's very cheap to get, it's quite useful and fun, whatever. And they just can't wrap their head around why is this not okay? Why should this be a problem? And understanding that it's not just about what you want to put in the container, it's the risk that you have to others. Now, if you multiply that by thousands, because some container ships have up to almost 20,000 containers on them, you can really see how that could affect not only yourself, but everybody. And that's one of the things why insurance protection is so important, especially in maritime law, because that will protect you from any damages that happen from that are not your fault, but it could be the fault of somebody else in their containers. And as insane as it may sound, if something happens and it's because there's an item in a container that shouldn't have been there, the vessels have the right to have the cost and compensation back from every single person who's bought a spot on that ship to put a container. So there's those kind of issues when it comes to legal rights and those kind of things. But there's also issues in terms of your personal items and how do you protect those, because even if you buy the right insurances and all those kind of things, it doesn't guarantee that it could fall off in the ocean or that there could be a fire or those kind of things. So in terms of protecting or preventing any kind of things that could go wrong, insurance is a great way to do that. But also in terms of prevention is the communication aspect. So really sitting down with the individuals and talking to them and coaching them through the move process. And this may sound kind of trivial and insignificant, but one of the first things that we do when we come into the home and we do preparation for the move, like laying down the protection materials, etc., we'll ask them, where are your keys, your passports, your documents, because those need to be with you. The move is going to be absolutely hectic. It will be so much faster than you actually think it will be because you've got a crew of guys coming in. It's going to be in and out very fast. And before you know it, if you don't know where these items are, you'll never find them. So we try to coach and consult people about any kind of documentation. Never ship anything that's irreplaceable. Birth certificates, those kind of things, don't ever ship. Passports, even if old passports. Some countries you don't know when you're applying for the immigration side, they may ask you for your old passport and proof of the last time you entered the country and those kind of things. So documentation is another thing that we'll really highlight. Jewelry, any financial items, coin collections, those kind of things. So we'll go through a consultation process to help to mitigate any of these risks. But in terms of providing a one-stop solution for all of these, it's really hard because any kind of risk could come up. You just really need to make sure that on the individual, you're looking at, because we're going into their home, we're looking at what they're planning on shipping, and we're advising them appropriately, saying, these are items that you need to think of. If you have a high value artwork, these are the things you need to be aware of. If your home is different and you don't have much artwork, but you have other items like, for example, endangered species, which has happened a lot. I'm talking zebra rugs and monkey heads and God knows what. Those type of things happen, and you really have to be prepared to explain what the regulations are, but also what the risks are to shippers.
There's so much we could talk about in this area. I love the whole maritime law, all of the different stories. I think there must be some great stories that go around the bars when you all get together about things that happen. I know my husband has those. Just, before we move off the topic of risk, do you see more risk when employees are, trying to manage the move themselves rather than kind of relying and working with either an RMC or a corporate mobility professionals?
Risk it's a very okay, so how to explain it from a risk perspective from moving. If you're looking at a lump sum project, right, you have everything inclusive of immigration, you have the housing, you also have the moving aspects of it, you have tax, those type of things. A lot of times, if the company themselves, if they're going to be open to risk, or the individual employee is going to be open to risk, those need to be handled differently. On a lump sum perspective, very often the entire picture is not taken into account. And because of that, a certain degree of negligence does creep into a relocation, which in turn would result in opening up either the assignee or the employer to having further risks. Now, if I look at it only from a household goods perspective, because that's my expertise, we do see that it's not so much a risk factor in terms of legal liabilities and those type of things, but what it really happens is the assignee is opened up to a whole plethora of problems that they need to manage and mitigate on their own, and just having a allowance to cover that is not enough. For example, if they're looking for support and understanding, they're moving to a new location. We just moved a family on a lump sum. She was going from San Francisco into Geneva, Switzerland, and she's bringing an automobile. She's bringing a whole bunch of things. I've moved enough that I needed to advise her and talk to her, say, listen, I understand that you want to take the car with you, but you have to prepare because in Switzerland, registering the vehicle, there's different requirements in terms of emissions and all these kind of things. So I don't want you to prepare to have everything shipped over. And she's like, oh my God, thank you. Nobody even told me this. I never even thought to think of these type of things. So it helps when you're fortunate enough, I could say it that way, for a lump sum relocating employee to have that consultation. However, those details are so minute that sometimes it's very easy for those things to be overlooked. And the problem is just one of those small things can become a very, very big problem, especially once it's like, you can imagine shipping the car. If it's already shipped into Geneva, she can't register it on the roads. It's not legally allowed to be driven within Switzerland. Now, what do you do with that? How do you handle that situation? We've had embassies that have had cars parked in their embassy parking lot for the duration of the entire assignment because of those kind of regulations and those type of things. So in terms of a risk, I would say not a legal risk from HHG, but you do have a risk of the shipper running into a lot more issues and problems. And if you think about it, if your employee is spending day and night jumping through all these hoops, trying to figure out all these ways that they're going to make a mistake, they're not focusing on their employment. They're not focusing on their job. And the main focus of an assignment is to provide a resource of productivity in that location that's not necessarily having it at the moment, whether it's a talent transfer, whether it's expertise, whether it's even an opportunity where the person is supposed to go and be mentored or something like that. There's a lot of those things that get put on hold, and because they're not immediate needs, they really don't wind up happening until much, much later. But the company's objective is to make sure that those happen immediately. So it's almost a catch-22, is that you want to save costs, but at the same time, you don't want to administer the move to or the relocation to give the support that you need. And there are technology solutions out there, but it's very hard to encompass everything because every employee is unique, every family is unique.
Absolutely. You've done such a great job of capturing the complexity of our industry. I think anyone who hasn't moved has no idea of all of the moving pieces and all of the things that can go wrong. And, a year ago, what we were talking about was the whole supply chain issues. We always had all of these risks you just talked about, but now suddenly we also had, COVID, the ships stuck in the canal, ports where ships were backlogged. Now we have inflation, a war, labor shortages. How predictable are household good moves today? And you mentioned early on that people are choosing a lot of air transport rather than sea. Is that because it's more predictable?
Great question. In terms of predictable or predictability, we've got to throw that out the window. Right now, everything's up in the air, and it still has been. And there's just so many moving parts to, and no pun intended, there's a lot of moving parts to a move. In the sense that, just in August, at the ports of Hamburg, were in negotiations over employment wages. Last month, we had threats of a rail strike in the United States, and the unions helped to negotiate packages and things like that for the employees. There's so many things that are happening right now, while at the same time, they're still trying to recapture the balance that was before. add into the fact that things are changing. And I think a great example, Apple just produced, there was a news article about what Tim Cook plans on doing in terms of producing more iPhones out of India. Now, Tim's has a background in supply chain, and it's just inevitable that anybody that has that expertise or familiarity with global supply chains is going to look for alternatives. If one supplier can't help you now, you're going to be looking to the next. And it's really a vetting process. It's a length of time. But what's happening is not only did we have this huge congestion during COVID, not only did we have these port closures and we had all these issues, factories closing, not producing, then we had them all turning back on, and the bulk of those things that were sitting there now trying to move on top of existing volume. You had all these bottlenecks, but now at the same time, you're having a change in what actual shipment routes are happening for supply chains. And at the end of the day, it's really important to understand, and this is so hard for people to wrap their head around, is that household goods is such a small player in the global shipping world. I mean, you're talking about if a container has 10,000 containers, maybe there's 20 or 200 or maximum 200 that are household goods specific out of that 10,000. So it's really the big players that are calling the shots. It's the steel manufacturers that are shipping thousands of containers daily of steel, concrete, cars, automobiles, agriculture. These are the industries that are really calling the shots. And 90, if not 99% of the vessels that are running these cargoes around the world are taking they're taking their direction from these industries because they're the largest paying customers. And it kind of backs in a little bit to the technology aspect that you were asking about before, is that right now there's a huge emphasis, especially from the government side in the United States. So with our company, we have three main businesses that we focus on. We focus on the government services, traditionally called GSA. We focus on the commercial and corporate, which is our Fortune 500 companies and working with RMCs with those companies. And then we have our consumer business that is working directly with that lump sum population. Now, the government side is really enforcing the shipment tracking aspect of moving, and they're bringing that back. And actually, in the next month, it's going to be enacted where all the moving providers need to have and provide access to shippers to and logins where they can find where the shipment is, etc. Now, this is all available, but one of the things that we're doing in our company is anticipating that even though people can track their shipments, they're not going to understand what's happening. So we're taking our inspiration from the Discovery Channel, and I don't know if you've ever seen that show of how it's made. Well, they'll take a mundane item like a house plug or something like that, and show you how it's manufactured and where the parts come from. We're doing that for a move. To really give an inside view for people to say, this is what really happened. So if your shipment is bound from, let's say, the port of Shanghai to Singapore, but your shipment first stops in, let's say Indonesia or even Australia, common sense says that doesn't make sense. Why would you go all the way to Australia and then back into Singapore? My shipment should have just gone from Shanghai to Singapore. Why is it taking 8 weeks instead of 2? That's not how the moving industry works. And so we're anticipating that even though people will be able to track their shipments, that and they can now, actually, all vessels, every container that goes, this is something that's existed for pretty much decades now, honestly, at least about 15 years. You've been able to track it. It's something that now needs to be enforced and provided access, etc. But the idea is that once people see into or see behind the curtain, they're going to be like, oh my God, what is happening? So we're anticipating that there's going to be that question. We have to address that.
So sometimes a little bit of information can be a dangerous thing. So given that we can't control the supply chain, that this information is out there in public, what tools are you making available to your clients to help them understand what's happening to them specifically so that they can rest easier at night?
Yes, that's critical. How we see our role is we understand, because this is our expertise, this is our profession. We understand the intricacies and the nuances of global shipping. Now, it's our job to actually translate that in bite-sizable information that's digestible to not only to mobility professionals and our RMC counterparts, but as well as to the shippers. And sometimes that is so overwhelming that it becomes a very hard endeavor to make something incredibly complex to make it very simple. So that's what we're aiming to do. And one of the things that we're producing, actually we're rekindling it It's something that we've had existing, and we didn't see much use out of it for our assignees is a move portal. And what we've looked at is, hey, what are the kind of the hurdles? We're providing these tools people are asking for, but nobody's using them. Why? So one of the things we looked at is the access to the application. So we decided actually, and this may be kind of going against the grains in some respects, but we decided against going through the heavy development side of technology and creating apps and developing all these kind of things that people need to download and get login access to and all these kind of things, because we realized that we had these and we still have them, but nobody's using them. So how can we make it more accessible, even though it's the information that they want? So we have a Move portal, a Move Central, that is accessible through our website. So it's very easy. It's online. It's if you have a shipment, you can get into it. And what we do is this, if you look at it, is basically a lens to filter and to interpret the entire moving world to the assignee. So this includes small things and big things, like, for example, if you try to track a container right now, and you go to Hapag-Lloyd or you go to one of the vessel carriers, you can log in and find your container. And it's going to give you almost what looks like an Excel list of all the ports it stopped on. It's going to give you, abbreviations of port names and all that kind of stuff. If you're just a lay person, this is not your focus on, you just have one shipment and you want your things and that's it. You're not going to take the time to understand this. So we've translated that into map views. And very simple. If you think almost like Apple, where you have, Find My Phone or something like that, that's exactly what we've developed. So we've taken that data that's already existing and we've interpreted it into a user-friendly interface that is very recognizable. So people can actually see their little ship with their container going across the map and understanding where it is and what's the expected dates and those type of things to help interpret the entire experience for them. Now, that's just a small, very, very tiny, minute example. But the idea of it is that for our company, we want to provide the tools necessary for the expatriates to find the information they need. But at the same time, we want to create a repository of that information that they can go to at any point in time. And that's why I think technology is so important, because even our internal database, we call it STAR, S-T-A-R. This is a global platform, absolutely integrated. So I can see what my German colleagues have, what shipments they have in the UK, China, Singapore, wherever in the world, India, Dubai. We can log in and we can see all the details. When was the survey, the dates, the packs, everything is completed. So that if I get a call, which I have, I had to move literally from California to Singapore and a storage shipment from London to California. And they were calling me to help to resolve the situation because the corporate was handling their move from California to Singapore, but not their move from London to California to combine them. So it was kind of like this fragmented situation. But I was on the phone with them discussing, hey, this is where I see your shipment is. This is what's happening in terms of your route into Singapore. We can plan this date. We can plan that. So anyway, the synchronicity between technology, access to it 24/7, and the ability to interpret key data points in a friendly, viewable manner is absolutely critical. And that's what Arpin is focusing on doing for our customers.
Well, Michael, I have so enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to talking about all of these things much more when we get to the Global Workforce Symposium in Las Vegas. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And it was a pleasure to talk a little bit about the moving side. And I definitely, certainly welcome any questions. And one thing I would love to have just as a takeaway is that anything's possible. So if we need to develop in policies or procedures or even resources for an expatriate population, that's something that we can focus on, something we can do, and something that we can produce. So I think a lot of those conversations need to be had, and I hope that the topics that you so wonderfully picked today, Lynn, inspire a bit of questions and comments, and I hope people reach out to see what we could do to develop resources for their programs and help their assignee population. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, and see you in Las Vegas.
See you in Las Vegas.